you need to make sure, sellers, that you're working with an agent that understands these. If you're in with one of these agents that sells maybe one or two houses a year, they're not going to be plugged into the market dynamics and what's going on from week to week. I think in a shifting market, if that's what's happening, you got to be really, really sensitive to what's happening from week to week. And it takes someone with experience to be able to know where you fit into that. Otherwise, you might be making the wrong decisions for this market.
We learned this morning in the daily financial news, the housing market is clearly crashing. Yes, folks, month on month, housing across the country is down. The crash bros are right. But you know what? We still need to transact real estate in this market. So what I'm going to do is we're going to talk with Mrs. Beth Traverso about what are 4 things sellers and 4 things buyers could do in a crashing housing market. Beth, how you doing this morning?
Yeah, I'm doing great. So first of all, I'm going to dispute the word crash, but we'll just go with that for the purposes of this conversation.
Got to feed the algorithm.
If that helps people feel better, then okay, but just be realistic about it. That'd be one of my things I would say for everybody. But so it's been all the chatter in the real estate community, meaning like the active brokers in the area, et cetera. I've been seeing in one of our Facebook groups, and where there was some discussion recently about, and it actually happens every year, just like, what's activity like? Oh my gosh, it's dead. Nobody came to my open house. Those kinds of things are going on. Mm-hmm. And one of the questions somebody had on there was like, I don't even know what should I say to my sellers? And people were saying, I don't even know what to say. Like, whoa, like you need to know if you're going to be working with sellers, guiding them in this market, you need to know what to say to give them the guidance they need, because they need to sell. So what do they need to do? And they're turning to us for that. And so I came up with a list, and also thinking, and we can also talk about buyers too, because I know a lot of folks listening here, they want to know, okay, well, what can I do as a buyer to make the most of this situation? So, and you can also look for sometimes where maybe some sellers aren't doing some of the things that I'm going to list out. And then you go, oh, those are the ones that might be the opportunity. So
I like it.
So
all right, so we're going to hit sellers first. Is that right?
Yeah, what sellers first. We'll hit that. So sellers need to be very mindful of the fact of what is happening in the market. And this is not the time to be unrealistic about pricing first and foremost. So, and a point that needs to be made is a lot of times sellers price their home based upon what they need for their next house they're buying or already bought or whatever. Buyers don't care about that at all. So the first thing that sellers have to do is let go of that, because their house now is a commodity that buyers are looking to buy, and they are looking at it through that lens, and they do not care what maybe it might have been worth before or what you want it to be worth. And so part of it is just looking at it as a commodity and thinking about that from the buyer's perspective, because they do not care about what you need to get from it. And we need to look, when I'm giving recommendations to sellers for pricing, we talk about a range, and I think it would be somewhere between here and here. And then we look at it again about a week before it goes on the market, because the market's always changing. And so lately I've been talking to sellers saying, we need to go on the lower end of the market, or even a little lower than what I originally recommended, because here's what we're seeing out there. And most are pretty realistic about it. And they do understand. People see the news. They've been consuming that as well. And so they understand that there's been some uncertainty out there for all the variety of reasons. And most are fairly realistic about it. If you're a listing agent and somebody's not realistic whatsoever and wants to go for something super aggressive, I would really consider maybe not taking that listing at this point, because there's time, money. If you're doing it right, there's time, money, and effort invested in a listing. And do you really want to direct your resources toward that versus someone who's going to be realistic about selling? So
I think that's wise advice. Again, buyers markets are markets that are evolving, or it's time for agents to have a backbone and really know the business. There's really no benefit in taking wish pricing. Right? If you're in a market where the house should go for $800 and they want $899 because their neighbor got something whenever, or whatever the reason is, why sign on the dotted line at $899 when you're going to have all of these expenses? And oh, by the way, a very unhappy client, because in 2 or 3 weeks they're going to yell at you. It's not a great idea.
It always ends up being the agent's fault no matter what, and they gotta understand that it's the market. So. And I like to be that agent that comes in after, because sometimes the second agent is the one that, that's one of my specialties, is somebody didn't sell it and now they want to sell it. And then they need to know, okay, what do we got to do to get it sold when they get more realistic? So don't be that first one, be the second one. Sellers, make sure to prep your home right. That house needs to be not necessarily remodeled, but 100% refreshed and turnkey. Now, I know this varies from market to market, but I think it's pretty universal that buyers want to move into a move-in ready house. Yeah. And that's why flippers have a business, right? Because people want to pay more for that. I'm not saying you need to flip a house to sell it, but you do need, nobody wants to move in to your dirty carpet. They want clean, fresh, new carpet. That's an inexpensive, high return item. And we hear a lot of people say like, well, the new owners are going to want to do that anyway. So why put money into that? I can tell you that they don't want to do that. Or
especially in this market where prices and interest rates are so high, especially a first-time home buyer, they don't have the extra 3, 4, 5, 10, 12 grand to refresh the carpet, to change out the AC. They want something that, ideally they don't have to invest in for five or more years.
Yeah, they want to at least have it at a baseline. The sweet spot is where it's a baseline where they can move in today and enjoy it now, and they can do those other things later if they want to. But not just the money, because the money is an issue, but then it's also the logistics of like, well, we close on the house, we got our kids, dogs, everything, and are moving out of our rental. Where are we going to stay? And then we got to find a contractor to come out and do those things, and they're flaky and they're all of that. So if they're going to take that on, they're going to want a huge discount for that, way more than the cost of doing that carpet paint.
Amen.
So that's something that people really got to understand, because a lot of people think like, oh, well, I would just come in and do all that out. Like, well, maybe you would, but the buyers aren't going to do that. And it's not even just that they won't offer less. They'll offer on another house where somebody already did that. They just won't even offer on your house. They'll all go to the other house. So prep the house properly. And the big three are paint, carpet, and landscaping. Make sure those things are tidied up. And pay close attention to the market. We got to know what's going on from week to week. So what I'm seeing, for example, this week, was still very, very low inventory on the bottom third tier. So if you're in that bottom third tier, you're going to have a different experience than if you're in the top third. We've talked about the luxury struggling right now because of oversupply. But that entry level tier is still a listing drought, nothing for sale. Maybe one house, not much. And so
the broken housing market continues.
Yes. And that middle tier is kind of hit and miss, so that's where like the pricing and the prep comes into play. So you need to make sure, sellers, that you're working with an agent that understands these. If you're in with one of these agents that sells maybe 1 or 2 houses a year, they're not going to be plugged into the market dynamics and what's going on from week to week. I think in a shifting market, if that's what's happening, you got to be really, really sensitive to what's happening from week to week. And it takes someone with experience to be able to know where you fit into that. Otherwise, you might be making the wrong decisions for this market.
I like it.
And then the fourth thing is, again, just use. I kind of blended these last two into one, but use the right agent that can decipher the nuances of the market. So like I was just talking to my team member before this call that I saw, granted it was a holiday week, but I saw there was a huge number of listings last week. This week, well, meaning, the last 7 days, a lot fewer, and more houses went pending than came on the market. So I'm like, okay, even though it's very slow out there, houses are selling. And it's an important thing to listing agents. Make sure your sellers know that houses are still selling. Some people think, my house isn't going to sell right now. It'll sell. You just have to do it right. But make sure you have an agent that knows how to tell you what to do to make it sell, and which houses are selling and which aren't. You got to know.
Yeah, when I think about being a seller today or representing seller agents, it really comes down to communication, expectation setting, and removing obstacles, right? You want to go into that listing conversation, letting them know that, today is not 2022. We could do an offer review date, but that guarantees nothing. Showings are slower. You just got to tell them where we are. Also, you could tell them, hey, if you can, right, you want to wait till next spring, that's always an option.
Yeah.
And then again, you're absolutely right about move-in condition, just especially if you're at the low end, you're dealing with first-time home buyers. They don't have the extra scratch or capital. They're saving every penny for the down payment.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, you're absolutely right. You got to pay attention to the market. The market's ever changing, ever evolving. Your market of King County is exiting the spring selling season, and things change both on listings, both on pendings. I think it's all great advice. So let's flip the script. Let's talk about being a buyer in this market.
Yeah.
What do you think buyers should do?
I'd be curious to know what the buyers are thinking out there on our community, because people wait for the slower market. But then the psychology, you have to get past that psychology of, oh, the market's turning, so therefore I'm going to do what the herd is doing and not buy and not make offers. You have to be able to conquer the psychology of that to look more long term.
Yeah, I really hope the one rental at a time community really is starting to get that right. We want more inventory. We want less competition. We want more motivated sellers. We want longer days on market. Congratulations, folks. We are 444. Yeah. It is time to get your buy box. It is time for disrespectful offers. The other thing I don't think a lot of people realize, Beth, is the money is made and the deals are made in the follow-up. I've never got an offer accepted the first time, and it usually is 3, 4, 5, 6 follow-ups before we really even have meaningful conversations. Because frankly, no seller wants to look at my offer. It's frankly disrespectful for a reason. But at some point, motivation gets there, and I'm the only game in town. So we start to have we start to have meaningful conversations. A deal doesn't always happen, but it happens sometimes.
Sometimes, and that's all you need is sometimes. And
exactly.
And it is that follow-up and just being methodical about it. And you don't need to do it in a way that people feel is unfriendly, because I think you can be like, hey, is there something you want to, what's important to you? So part of it is making sure that the conversation is with your buyer's agent is having the conversation with the listing agent to ascertain, is this one of these sellers that really needs to sell? Try to find out as much as you can about their situation and what's important to them, because if it's one of these people, it's like, well, they don't really care if they sell or not, and they can just sit on the market forever. Then, well, they're probably not going to be the one for you. But if there's somebody where they've already moved, they have their new home, this is a burden to them, or it's a divorce or a death situation or something like that, those they have to sell. So
let's also talk about let's talk about being a listing agent, and then myself being an investor, right? So I'm the buyer, you're the listing agent. Right. And you bring a property to market that for whatever reason is in my buy box. I want people to realize that you can go to the listing agent. If you're an investor, you can go to the listing agent, but do it with respect, do it with understanding, right? Let's say, again, Beth brought a property to market at 800. I'm just picking that number at random. I'm not going to go to Beth with a 600K offer the first week. That's ridiculous, right? It's just come out. Let's see what happens. But she probably signed a 90-day or 6-month listing contract. If the days on market average is, call it 48, I might reach out to her on day 60, especially if it hasn't had a price drop yet, and say, hey, Beth, I'm looking at this listing, 123 Main Street. It's in my buy box. I don't know the situation or anything, but when I pencil out for me, I can't pay more than 600. Is that something that you'd entertain now? You might come out and say, absolutely not. The seller doesn't have to sell. They're going to take it off. Or you could say, I haven't had a showing in 3 weeks. I don't think they're going to take 600, but let's try something. Let's get the conversation going. Because again, in the background, you have a seller that's now 60 days in an average market of 48. They're definitely cranky, and they could be borderline upset with you. So it might be time just to bring them an offer to kind of bring that conversation together. What do you think of all that?
Yeah, I think that's good. And I do have investors do call me directly. That does happen sometimes with certain properties that fit a certain profile, and we'll get those calls. And they're often floating ideas like a creative financing and things like that too, which may or may not make sense. But you got to ask the question, are they open to this? Or are they open to that? Or if it's not financeable, what about if we do this way? Or if these other, they're the problem solver. So investors are basically searching for the problem and looking for the solution that creates the good investment for them and the sale for the seller. Does that work all the time? No, but enough times it does. So it's absolutely worth having that conversation. And one thing I want to point out too is make sure you or your agent knows how to decipher the read between the lines, because there's this whole like realtor speak, this like language that happens where you can read between the lines about what's really going on there. Because sometimes they're not going to say, because they're working for the listing agent's working for the seller, and they have to. The law is, we need to support that seller's best interest. So you got to be careful what you say as a listing agent sometimes. But sometimes you can decipher between the lines to understand, okay, here's what's really happening here.
Yeah. The other thing to realize, again, I don't think a lot of buyers/investors understand, is you as a listing agent certainly have spent time, probably have spent money on this listing where you have a cranky client and you have a time limit. So when you start to get out extended on that, it's even good for you to have those conversations and see where the market is at and see what is possible. So it really can be that win-win conversation, but please don't be an idiot and offer 600 on an 800 the first week. That's
your work as a buyer, but then when the situation's right, I know for myself, I'll say, like, bring the offer. Like, if it's a real legitimate offer, like, let's bring it and we can have a discussion about it. There's one thing I will say as a listing agent, I never say what my seller will accept or not, because only they know that, and we don't know until we're in a negotiation. I can't negotiate an offer I don't have, but if somebody wants to write the offer, you can feel it out and see how the questions are answered. And then when the offer comes in, legally, we present all offers, and then we can have a discussion about it and see where it goes. And know that a text is not an offer, and you need to have an actual conversation with the listing agent. So
love that. Again, folks, it's very clear that the housing market is changing. Again, I have said all year that 2025 will be the year of the investor. We have more supply. We have less demand. We have more motivated sellers. It is time to get after it. Beth, if somebody wanted to reach out and buy in King County, or better yet, get a referral to another top agent across the country, what do they do?
Yeah, BethTraversoGroup.com on the screen here is a great way to reach out to me through the contact me, or you can Google me and find me online pretty easy too. And I am in school as well. So
awesome, Beth. Thank you so much. Have a great week.
Thank you. Take care.